this tell us about the persistence of caste in the digital pornography realm as well? Like when we're thinking about the pornographic archive, and you've said that it is both a fantasy structure and a material reality of sorts.
So there are two responses to it. One is soft porn era has totally fizzled out by the
Mhm.
2000s, right? So after it fizzled out because of the oversaturation of content, the same kind of narrative and thematic kind of
For
repetition,
sure.
it led to the fizzling out of the industry. So the industry was not there anymore. But during the pandemic, there were a bunch of, OTT platforms that popped up.
Mhm.
All of them are drawing the narrative from the soft porn films. And they
Yeah.
are very popular in India and also in South Asia because the moment you pull one down, another one pops up. So it was kind of a concern for the government in terms of trying to regulate it and understanding what else is happening. So in the platform era, I think there are two things that is happening. Like many cure scholars have written about the very fact that sometimes people are looking for representations, looking for bodies, connections, and the kind of desires that they want. And for your community, especially in very sexually conservative societies, sometimes
Mhm.
online platforms are the places that are connecting people. So, looking pornography right from the kind of like it's like a zone of illicit media,
Mhm.
and making a blanket claim will completely eliminate the desire of communities who are not like, or have like different desires, etc. But at the
Mhm.
same time, this doesn't mean like people are allowing child pornography either. So I think we needed to understand that pornographic practices encompass a wide array of things. In the 1990s, if you remember, that the material that was circulated around HIV/AIDS were also
Mhm.
seen as pornography because anything
Uh-huh.
to do with sex could become pornography. And pornographers, the term also comes about writing about prostitutes. So
Mhm.
there's always this idea of unconventional sexual behavior that doesn't fit into the norm or dominant paradigm that's
Mhm.
used to refer to pornography. So I think whenever I'm using pornography or talking about media regulation, I try to mark this distinction. One is like the idea of age appropriate media. That is one of the ways in which soft porn was trying to market itself by saying that this is 18 plus. They are all
Mhm.
adults, right? They're not films where you can go and watch it with your children. And even the Central Board of Film Certification, they also came up with videos. Films Division came up with videos on what is an A film, right? So A film is a film where you will not take your children. So I think 19 in early 2000, like 2007, there was even a proposal in the Indian, Information and Broadcasting Ministry that was proposed by Vijay Anand, who was the Central Board of Film Certification chairman, that there has to be theaters where A films can be distributed, exhibited. They can be just for A films. But
Mhm.
he had a
Mhm.
huge pushback and had to resign. So it's interesting that what is consumed, what platforms do these forms take, are all important when we are discussing about like pornography as a discourse, pornography as a representation, pornography as a mode of practice connecting people. And there is also a wide circulation of phone sex, escort services, all of
For
which
sure.
are also making use of the similar practices. So when I did field work in Middle Eastern Gulf, I also like spoke with sex workers
Yeah.
about like what is a pornographic imagination that comes across in the way they are meeting with the clients, because in the lot of like Indians from blue collar labor force in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Saudi. So my fieldwork is mostly in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So many of these women said that these men are not really coming to have sex. They just
Yeah.
want company, right? Like you are staying away from your family, and you're just looking for a kind of a connection, the kind of relationality that you're building in a place where you're both aliens.
Mhm.
You always guest workers. You will never become citizens, right? And some of these women are being asked by these men to actually read out some pornographic literature, and that was it. And so it's
Mhm.
important to keep in mind that soft porn is not just a filmic form. It had its precedents in
Yeah.
erotic fiction and also like illustrations. So there is a longer history that soft porn is entering, and the kind of continuation of soft porn is what you refer to in terms of OTT platforms exclusively meant for soft porn and certain bodies which are seen as hyper visible and desirable. So in some dating sites, right, like saying what your racial or ethnic preferences are one way
Mhm.
of again like tapping into a specific narrow pool of people that you're interested in. And that's the same algorithmic logic that you will see in many porn sites.
Mhm.
So Pornhub, for sorry, good.
Yeah, I wanted to continue on sort of the hypervisibility theme for a bit. Shakila became a major box office draw. Can you tell a little bit about her hypervisibility and what it meant in terms of erasure? Her films made
Mm.
millions, but she never was allowed to cross over to mainstream cinema. What does her story tell us about the limits of mobility in the film industry?
Great question, Cher. So, in my 2019 article, which came out in Feminist Media Studies, that's where, I was thinking about precarious stardom, which also appears in the book. Very fact that Shakila was a star, but she was not a star in the currency of the term we use in mainstream cinema. She was a
Yeah.
star whose stardom was precarious, precariously placed on multiple counts, that she can only be a star in soft porn and she can never be
Hmm.
even a second tier star in mainstream cinema, because by the very fact that she became like this hyper visible figure and a mascot for soft porn meant that she's not permitted or allowed to cross over to other things, despite the fact that she acted in cameo roles with many mainstream actors. Her presence there was always as a soft porn star Shakila coming in, not
Yeah.
as an actress Shakila coming in. So the entry exit kind of barriers are interesting. So Shakila's films, like when Shakila's first film was Kinnara Tumbikal, which was made by a director called R.J. Prasad. So in my interview with R.J. Prasad,
Hmm.
it's very interesting. He's a filmmaker who wanted to make an art film, and the film was actually thought through very interestingly in terms of scripting and other things. And there is this angle of intergenerational love in the film, which
Hmm.
automatically put the film as a soft porn, even though the
Hmm.
film did not have too much of sexual sexual simulation per se. The promotion strategies used by the distributors create a certain aura of it being like a sex film, because again many of these film had this idea of a elderly woman who is actually initiating the younger men into the intricacies of lovemaking. So Shakila's figure was like that.
Hmm.
So that particular idea of Shakila, a heavy-bodied, buxom figure, also captured the imagination of Madhaka Rani as someone who is not a woman whom you will marry, but who is the other woman, the mistress figure, whom you can
Hmm.
fantasize about, who will not demand marriage or anything more than what you provide. So it's interesting that that kind of circuit of desire and fantasy basically etched onto the body of Shakila. And the films
Hmm.
became so successful, so much so that the films came, softporn films in general, at one point of time came to be called Shakila films. So in my research, I also went to a lot of soft porn theaters showing these films. So, in 2010, when I started the project, I was actually, going to a bunch of theaters in Kerala to get a sense of what does it look like to watch these films and how are these films being projected. And the projectionist has a crucial role to play in soft porn films, because always keep in mind soft porn films is the last fag end of celluloid era, right? So the celluloid era is nostalgically associated with soft porn in the Malayali imagination, because that's
Hmm.
the time where the transition took place. So there are what is called tunde, or sexually explicit pieces or cut pieces, which are added into the film reel during the exhibition by the projectionist. So
Hmm.
I was curious to know about it, and I always wanted to know about what were the projectionists thinking, at
Hmm.
what part of the film that they wanted to insert this clip, etc. So I interviewed a lot of projectionists also, who had like fantastic stories to share. And it's not like they will insert it when and where it places. They had a logic as well in terms of what will fit in, and what they had in mind is that they wanted to give the surprise to the audience. They want the
Hmm.
audience to know that there is someone behind the screen who is thinking through the idea of cinematic pleasure, the
Hmm.
unanticipated cut piece, disrupting your pleasure of watching the film. But again, like that pleasure is what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So I found it fascinating because these men are really thought through, and I'm talking about men who are in their 60s who
Yeah.
are working as projectionists, and for them also talking about this was really exciting because I don't think anybody actually thought any person would come there to talk to them, and it was a very promising experience for me to know that there is a project out there which I'm interested to unpack. So going back to Shakila's films were very popular. And Shakila was not the only soft porn actress. There were a bunch of other actresses. And another thing to keep in mind about soft porn, especially Malayalam soft porn, is that they never allowed a native indigenous actress to perform these roles. Soft porn
Interesting.
actresses were all from outside Kerala. They were from neighboring states like Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Telugu, even Maharashtra and Punjab, right? So for
Why
them,
was that?
it was, I think, like when I spoke to a bunch of filmmakers, and A.T. Joy being and U.C. Roshan, they were
Uh-huh.
saying that, it's always better not to shoot the films, if possible, in Kerala, and not to
Uh-huh.
use film labor, especially women's labor. The women has to be from outside so that we can protect the industry. If at all, the kind of like attacks that possibly would have women's group, or for that matter, morally conservative groups would have against us, we could still say that, this is a labor force which is mixed. This is not only a Malayali labor force. And also that I think there is a cultural purity argument to it. They're not agreeing that they thought through it, but it's also about the fact that the native women from Kerala were not recruited directly, also would basically give them a free pass. That, they're not like, and one thing I remember one of the producers telling me that if at all like people moonlight as sex workers, they do other odd jobs, and
Uh-huh.
they do not want these women to be seen as sex workers because it decredits and delegitimizes the kind of labor that goes into the making of the film. So cultural purity argument on the one hand and labor procurement on the other. And that's why, Madhaka Rani figures were always seen as coming from outside. Vijay Shree also, like the earlier actress I mentioned, she was born and brought up in Chennai, even though she's a Malayali. So it's interesting that that argument has always been there. So Shakila, after a point decided to, like charge per day instead of for per project. So at one point of time, she charged around 1 lakh rupees per day. And
Uh-huh.
that's when filmmakers realized that they can shoot for multiple films on one day, which
Uh-huh.
Shakila was not aware of. And many film industry insiders still think that that basically was the death knell of the industry,
Yeah.
that like multiple films being made simultaneously, similar plots, and the recycling of material. So that was the kind of transition. And Shakila like also had her own kind of preferences in terms of what role she would be doing. And she never did topless roles. There were also a body double that she had, who wrote like in my book I refers to that, who basically wrote a memoir about her experience of being a body double of Shakila. So even to think that a soft porn actress would have a body double in an industry was interesting, right? So
You also argue that Shakila's presence in Malayalam film is sort of a challenge to both industrial and social hierarchies, right? Could you expand on that further as well?
yeah. So on two things. One is that, like soft porn films primarily had its narrative centered around a kind of a female lead who had her desires, and the whole story was about her desires, her aspirations, and struggle she goes through. So the male actors did not have much role to play. So much so that they all felt humiliated being part of this film. So some of the male actors who acted in soft porn were like, oh God, that was not okay. Where we did not have anything in control, right? Like the whole narrative was about the woman and not about us.
Yeah.
And even in film reports about soft porn, you will see this idea of emasculinating kind of tendency of soft porn, where the masculinity of the actor is being taken away, where the female lead is the main person around whom the narrative centers, around whom the production decision of the film centers around. So that also unsettle the way we think about film production in mainstream
Yeah.
cinema, because in mainstream cinema it's a heavily actor centric production pattern. You
And
basically,
many of your interviewees spoke about how their labor in the soft porn films was sort of was hidden.
yeah.
You know, technicians, directors
Mhm.
would use pseudonyms. So what does that tell us about the status of the industry? And I think it also relates to the question of alternative labor networks, right?
Right. So soft porn, the peak of soft porn came at a time when Malayalam film industry was facing significant financial crisis. All the films by main film stars were failing in the box office, and the film exhibitors and distributors needed some survival mechanism. Soft porn films were low budget films, and that became like a kind of a make do arrangement that allowed the film industry to recoup that kind of struggling phase. And many exhibitors whom I spoke with said that Shakira was the savior. She was the savior who basically helped us stay afloat. And
Yeah.
software also gave a possibility for technicians from mainstream industry to basically, move to soft porn, use fictitious name, be part of the filmmaking, and move back. And that was the main concern I had when I was trying to track down people. The people whose name appear in the credits sometimes don't exist. And you're trying to triangulate the data from multiple sources, and you're like, who are these people? Are these people real? And that's when I decided that I will work with a production manager. This production manager is like the intermediary. He will know the pre-production process, he will know the production, he will know the post-production, because he's the one handing over the print to the lab.
Yeah.
So I thought that will be the person, and I was absolutely right. I think that was the person who basically helped me unpack the fictitious terminologies around it. And there were many like prominent directors who were part of soft porn but who do not talk about it. And some of them made films in their own names but did not consider them to have dabbled in soft porn. But there is also this kind of a creative license that is given, right? Like you make good films, but this was like one of those films that you made because things were
Yeah.
bad. But that also means that the soft porn filmmakers who made these films, who were basically coming from below the line labor force. Some of them were production assistants, some of them were makeup artists. So when they started to think about making the films, the main kind of drive for them was to have creative decision making. They're like, we know what films will sell because they were like NRI films. I will get to that in a second, which were, flooding the market. And these films were highly successful, and exhibitors were watching for the fact that you make films with the same template that will succeed.
Yeah.
So it became like indigenous way of using the exploitation film paradigm to make films that will appeal to the local audience, something the local audience are already familiar culturally, like, through Kambipadam and erotic fiction, so that they don't have to think about it as import from outside. So for many of my respondents, like soft porn was like the death knell of their career. You end the soft porn to the, disappointment of your family members and everyone around you. They were taking a huge risk. And, so as a female ethnographer in the field, and I was in the field for longer, people would invite me to their family because sometimes their wives will be concerned about why you're hanging around with a woman all the time. And they wanted me to talk about my work as a broader interest in film production, but not in
Yeah.
soft porn. So they were like, no one wants to be reminded of that phase where everyone was disappointed that this is what has happened to you. So there is this idea of a corruption, or, the impure element unsettling our family and our kind of, pride as workers, that was there on one side of the journey. So for many filmmakers, I think talking about soft porn after like 15 years since decline, I think that time gave a little bit of time to process what happened. And some of them even said that we were way ahead of our time. And right now you have like, the idea of phone sex and this online erotic platforms and creator culture doing exactly what we were trying to do years before.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add, I guess like it relates to this other question I had. Could the industry be seen as a form of economic resistance as well?
I think it could be seen as a resistance against the hierarchy that structured film industry, because there is a kind of a premium placed on idea of waiting, that you wait for the right time, you wait, and only waiting will fetch you return. So anyone whom I spoke with said that, we are waiting, we have to be resilient. So the idea of resilience is created as kind of what you should ideally follow if you want to succeed. So there is a success mantra embedded in it. In film industry, most of the films fail, very few succeed. So I was interested in the idea of success and failure, economically speaking, like economic success in terms of box office. And like you said earlier, Shakila did not get anything at the end of the day. Right, she became like the mascot of soft porn films, but financially speaking, it didn't give her much, because the informal way in which film production in general functions doesn't give that kind of negotiation power for actors, or film personnel in general. In this case, I think that soft porn industry, its rise and fall, is important in the history of Malayalam cinema on two counts. One is that that was the one time when people are talking about different scales of hierarchy. Why can't a makeup man make a film? Are we like stuck here forever?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, or an assistant director who had made like 25 films, and he's in his 50s and he's still assistant. So I think that idea of wanting to cut the line, not in terms of like cutting the line by taking someone's position, but they wanted to know that there is an alternative arena possible, and the alternative arena was money and capital. Where do you come up with the money? And these people were enterprising, sure, we should agree, because they basically contacted financiers based in Gulf, you know Malayalis who have gone to Gulf, and they wanted to see a film with this like their name in it and want to know the production around it. So they many of these films were funded by Gulf producers who sometimes did not use their name. They used the name of their managers or made up names. And many of these banners that produce the films did not last for too long. They made one or two films and then disappeared.
Yeah.
So, but I think that is the argument that is used against soft porn. That soft porn was not interested in labor. They just came. They were interested in money. But I would say that we needed to shift the narrative a little bit, because there is something more to it. Why people would take so much of a risk to
Oh,
compromise on stories. Yeah, so it is also so there is an economic argument to be made about soft porn. Soft porn came as a make-do arrangement, but soft porn was also, trying to work with new arrangements in the exhibition and distribution. I'll end with that. Exhibition and distribution network was where soft porn filmmakers were trying to understand what really would work by helping the exhibitor and distributor reduce the risk. So any
mhm.
mainstream film which goes to an exhibition or a distribution circuit, they have to pay huge advances in order to procure the material. In the case of soft porn films, there was a different profit sharing arrangement between the distributor and the exhibitor. It's a 50-50 thing. So no one is losing much. If the film is going to succeed, they will get it. If it is going to lose, the losses will be kind of equally tallied in their accounts. So I think that alternative possibility of what could happen, where you are thinking of different stakeholders who are all like pushing against their boundaries of what they would have ideally do in a normal scenario, was something I think was very much evident in soft porn's rise and decline.